In the morning, the square in front of the church is damp and smells of wet wood. Cloth banners hang from ropes, parchment with city decrees flutters on the bulletin board, and a guard in a woolen cloak dozes by the wall. A preacher who has arrived from a neighboring monastery demands body checks on adult townspeople suspected of heresy. He promises to recognize marks on the skin, force confessions without evidence, and bring the guilty to the square. The crowd stirs. It needs a spectacle after a long winter. At the same time, scrolls are laid out in the town hall, rulers, seals, sandboxes for recording testimony, forms with fields for place, time, thing, witnesses, and medical notes. Here, shame is not considered evidence. Here, it is believed that the body of an adult is a description of a condition, not evidence. Dear viewers, welcome. Write where you are watching from and whether you have ever seen morality try to replace procedure. Your experience is important to this conversation. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy listening. We will examine how, under Pope Gregory IX, the Church's investigative apparatus began to take shape, and how 13th century city courts responded by putting up barriers, statutes, doctors, scribes, and witnesses to prevent eroticized accusations and public examinations in place of material evidence. In the middle of the 13th century, Europe was living at the intersection of two logics. Messages were coming from Rome about the Inquisitio investigation. A bishop or authorized preacher had the right to start an investigation on hearsay, collect testimony, and summon suspects. Under Pope Gregory IX, this system was given an organizational rhythm. Monastic orders took on the task of identifying heresies, and episcopal chancelleries accumulated questionnaires. City councils used a completely different set of tools: community statutes, books of customary law, lists of prohibited ordeals, and the acceptance of medical notes as descriptions of a person's condition rather than as evidence. After the council banned trials by fire and water, physical examinations faded into the background, but preachers tried to bring them back in a different way, through shame, hints of night meetings, and searches for marks on the skin of adult women and men. The city responded with forms. Without evidence and witnesses, don't start. In one seaside town, the office receives a denunciation. An adult salt merchant is accused of heretical seduction of parishioners and contempt for the institution of marriage. The preacher insists on an examination and checking for skin insensitivity. But the town hall statutes, adopted after cathedral decisions, already state that any physical tests are prohibited as humiliating and lacking in evidential value. Doctors and midwives are allowed only to describe the condition, not as experts in guilt. The judge demands evidence: where the secret gatherings took place, what was read, who saw it, what items were found. The guard brings the key to the chest, a scrap of parchment with a psalm, and a wet rag from the bench. The doctor notes cracks on the hands from salt barrels, signs of cold and exhaustion. The midwives confirm that the scars are from labor and childbirth, not marks. Without torture, the case falls apart. Witnesses speak from hearsay. There are no items, and the time and place do not match. The crowd is noisy and demands a spectacle, but the treasurer reminds them that each night watch for rituals means firewood, guards, and idle benches. The city calculates the cost. The documents reveal not only a clash of morals and norms, but also a darker desire. The second twist comes when the clerk notes in the margins that the denunciation coincides with the timing of the transaction for the house at the pier. It turns out that after confiscation, the property would have passed into the hands of a man with debts to a moneylender. As soon as the lawyer lays out the deed, promissory note, and complaint on the table, the picture changes. Concern for faith turns out to be a lever in the property war. The court shifts the issue from shame to facts and appeals to the city records, right of possession, plot boundaries, neighbor testimony, payment dates. The preacher demands marks on the body, but the statutory lines are more important. Body checks in matters of faith are prohibited. Confessions obtained through humiliating practices are invalid without evidence, and 2 adult witnesses to the fact. The scribes rewrite the protocol. The evidence column is empty. Meanwhile, the streets want bread and circuses. The third knot arises at the temple doors. After lunch, the crowd demands cleansing of the city, names names, asks for exposure of conscience, promises to see the truth in the eyes of the adult women under suspicion. The guards put up barriers, and the council publishes a notice. Hearings will be held only in the town hall. Interrogations will follow the order of the Roman canonical process. Participants will include a judge, a clerk, and a doctor. Any public examinations not medically necessary will be punishable by a fine. The treasurer adds a second document. Expenses for prayer nights will not be deducted, as they do not lead to evidence. The shops sigh. Without firewood, there will be nothing left to heat the stoves for the spectacle. The fourth move is in the interrogation technique. The city's interrogation notebook is designed to eliminate eroticized questions from the process. Instead of questions about bedding, there are sections for objects, routes, correspondence, and debts. Instead of a look that makes men swoon, there is a check for wine on water and salt on mold. Instead of insensitivity of the skin, there is a noteworthy medical section. Cracks from salt, frostbite, traces of hard labor. A note that this is a description of a condition, not evidence. Thus, the legal form deprives the sermon of its strongest bait, shame and spectacle. The crowd loses interest when real action is replaced by counting barrels and keys. The fifth and most important barrier is the union of paper worlds. The Inquisitio allows for investigation on hearsay, but city procedure requires reasonable suspicion based on evidence and witnesses. And while papal letters strengthen the network of officials to combat heresy, town halls learn to live with this tool without giving it the courtroom. In some years, abuses are inevitable, and the authorities behave like authorities. They delay summonses, lose papers, and exert their authority. We note this briefly as a social fact, but each time, the city returns the case to the evidence. Without an object, without a witness, without a material trace, there is no progress. One record notes this with the words, "Without torture, there is no case. Property is not confiscated. It is dry and it saves." The myth of continuous eroticized cruelty is based on an image of a square and naked shame. The document gives a different picture. Scribes with rulers, doctors with notes, midwives, witnesses of boundary walks, a treasurer with an expense column, statutes with direct prohibitions on bodily trials. Pope Gregory IX launches an investigation, but city statutes embed it in a world where things and witnesses are more important than the piercing gaze of a preacher. In this world, shame is not the currency of justice, but a source of mistakes and losses. The body of an adult is not evidence, but an object of care and medical description. Faith is not a reason to confiscate a house at the pier if the redistribution of property is carried out under the name of jealousy. Further on, we will see how this procedure will hold up under the pressure of the crowd, how denunciations will be untangled on counting tables, and how the final formula, no torture, no case, will turn from a successful line into a stable order where erotic accusations die away on forms and property remains with those who can present a key and a deed. Two genres of law are intertwined in the town hall office, and clerks learn to keep them at a distance, like two streams of cold and hot water. On the one hand, there is the episcopal investigation by hearsay, where an authorized adult preacher has the right to initiate an inquisitio, collect circumstantial evidence and demand appearances. On the other hand, there is the city order, born of trade books, debts, rents, and craft statutes, where every step is paid for with candles, time, and risk. After the cathedral bans on trials by water and iron, city statutes clearly stated, nothing that humiliates an adult body can be used as evidence. Examinations are only allowed to describe the condition with the participation of a doctor and midwives without an audience and without assessments. At the same time, Pope Gregory IX's decretals, which collected scattered canons into a coherent code, left Rome and the investigation took shape. But the form of the city is different, and when you try to mix them, it's not the flame of truth that comes out, but smoke from wet wood. The crowd is waiting for a show, and the scribe is handing out forms. Before our eyes lie cases where the difference in frameworks becomes material. One letter, written by a city clerk, records that an adult craftsman was accused of secret meetings and contempt for the sacraments. The preacher insisted on a body check, wanting to see the signs. The judge, relying on the statute, translated the conversation into the language of things. He asked for the place and time of the meeting, for the objects to be presented, and for the lists of names to be shown. As a result, a bunch of keys, draft letters, and candle stubs were brought from the warehouse. The doctor noted traces of hard labor and old illnesses in the relevant section, and midwives confirmed that the scars and spots were not marks, but evidence of their craft and the winter cold. Without torture, the case fell apart like a bag with a hole. The witnesses had heard rumors, but had not seen the act. The object was not sufficient evidence, and the root did not add up. In the margins, the clerk left a terse phrase: "The description of the condition is not evidence." Sometimes inquisitio and statutory order go hand in hand, but at different speeds. A search based on hearsay brings a basket of names. The city asks for 2 adult testimonies of fact, not fear. The preacher demands that an adult woman or man be read by the skin. The statute points to the line: bodily tests are prohibited. Humiliation does not provide evidence. The search offers a set of signs: paleness, trembling, silence, rare communion. The city book responds with minimalism: either the thing or the place and time, or the consistent testimony of 2 adults. With this either, the city removes from the process the most scarce currency of the crowd: shame and spectacle. There is nothing to see if you have to show the key and the sheet, not the skin and fear. The second seam between myth and document is property geography. In one case, involving adult residents of a house near the pier, a denunciation of heretical meetings coincided with the conclusion of a land purchase agreement. The clerk discovered that after confiscation, the property would pass to a neighbor who was already overburdened with debt. The council ordered the collection of deeds, debt records, and testimony about property boundaries. A simple matrix emerged. At the center was not faith, but the beneficiary. And here, the city's logic unfolded like a barrier. Any steps in the case could only be taken with material evidence and proven roots. Any inspections could only be conducted without evidence, and any confessions could only be made with reasonable suspicion based on objects and facts. The crowd demanded public humiliation, but the treasurer posted a list of expenses for night vigils, security, and firewood. The figures looked like a verdict on the spectacle. It was more expensive than checking the warehouse and questioning the neighbors. The third plan was medical dryness, which deprived erotic hints of their support. The town hall doctor was obliged to attend any proceedings concerning the bodies of adults. His remarkable part sounded like a list of winter misfortunes: cracks from salt and wind, anemia after starvation, dermatitis from dampness, scars from childbirth and crafts, numbness of the skin at the sight of old burns. Midwives who knew the craft of women, gave their conclusions: stitches, healing, the consequences of hard work. These lines did not flatter the crowd, but they nullified the preacher's main lure, the promise to see through the body. When the body was returned to the condition column, the accusation lost its appeal even for the fussy plaintiffs. They had to look for things, and things did not always obey jealousy. The fourth loop was the organization of the interrogation. City forms were rewritten so as not to leave room for night questions. The traps for shame disappeared from the form. No records of bedding, touching, female cunning, or male weaknesses. Instead, there were route tables, bags of goods, references to warehouse books, lists of keys, and inventories of chests. The scribe became an engineer of the process. He did not allow heated words to cross the line between speech and evidence. The judge made sure that the medically noteworthy part did not spill over into evidence. The preacher was annoyed, pushing aside the forms, but it was precisely these forms that enabled the city to wake up without pogroms. The fifth, painful area is the meeting of investigation and market in times of disaster. Crop failure and cold weather embolden those who like shortcuts. The crowd advocates purification, promising to burn fears along with marks. The authorities behave in different ways, as authorities do. In some places they tolerate gatherings, in others they lose papers until a favorable time, and in others they pressure judges with their authority. We record this discreetly as a social fact. But where the statutory framework has managed to take root in habits, the mechanism holds. Everything concerning the bodies of adults is only private and only as a description. Everything concerning guilt is only based on evidence and witnesses. Everything concerning torture is only based on strong suspicions and with the sanction of the council. The formula, no torture, no case, sounds harsh, but it also offers salvation from the exploitative thirst for spectacle. Alongside the process goes the invisible arithmetic of trust. Guilds demand proof because they hate downtime. Usurers keep their interest if they see that the city does not allow the crowd to break down shops, shouting about marks on the skin. Parish authorities notice donations and silence, and this is also capital of trust. Any preacher of jealousy who brings a set of signs to the office is met with a wall of paperwork. Describe when and where, show the object, bring adult witnesses to the fact. And as this is repeated, the erotic imagery is washed away like salt from cracks by rain. There are also dark hints of abuse in these cases. Sometimes an adult suspect is held longer than required. Sometimes letters are strangely delayed. Sometimes the guards behave rudely, and the preacher presses with words. We note this without going into detail, as facts of social damage. Health is ruined, reputations are destroyed, money is wasted on empty purifications. And it is precisely this accounting of harm that gives the city council an argument for harshness. A ban on physical trials, a refusal to pay for prayer nights, the transfer of the investigation to the morning, where keys, barrels, books, and signatures are visible. Where the treasury counts, the crowd tires. One indicator, like a thermometer, shows that the barrier is working. The proportion of cases where people ask to examine the body is falling, while the proportion of cases where people bring a key, a letter, a seal, and 2 adult witnesses is rising. This does not make the world a better place. It remains harsh, with disease, hunger, and political pressure. But it is in such a world that the law begins to distinguish between shame and evidence, faith between conscience and profit, and the city between preaching and trial. And although the papal investigation system is taking root and expanding its network of trusted individuals, the city hall remains a place where a ruler, sand, and a seal are more important than shouting. On this basis, the next turn is being prepared, a clash between a high-profile case and the rigid formula of statutes, where a denunciation of heresy, intertwined with real estate, will be unraveled on counting tables down to the last string of keys, and the crowd will again leave without a spectacle, and the property will remain at home because shame did not become evidence. In cases where the search by hearsay has already gathered a basket of names, the next layer of work makes the process not a spectacle, but an inventory. Scribes lay out on the table items that really mean something: house keys, copies of deeds, receipts for renting a shop, scraps of correspondence, seals on bags. The town hall doctor prepares a noteworthy section for a possible description of the condition, and midwives prepare their reports on scars and the consequences of labor. At the same time, the authorized preacher tries to bring the conversation back to skin and shame, but the city form pulls him toward things, time, and place. In one case, an adult bookbinder is accused of hiding forbidden sheets and seducing people into heresy. The investigation asks to read the body, but the statute leaves no room for interpretation. No examinations as evidence, only objects and witnesses. The guards find a workbench, knives, discarded notebooks, ink with sediment, and a list of customers. The doctor describes cuts on her fingers and calluses from the needle. Midwives note that the spots on her skin are traces of glue and winter air, not marks. Then it gets boring and therefore honest. They count the brochures, compare initials, and find out that the suspicious sheets are a collection of the guild's accounting rules and psalm marginalia. Without torture, the case falls apart because there is no evidence that can be put on the table, and there are no two adult witnesses to the fact who are ready to sign for the place and time. The logic of the statute wins not with eloquence, but with infrastructure. A separate table holds lists of general expenses: guards, firewood for the nights, payment for scribes, candles, doctor's fees. The treasurer looks at the numbers in words and records every attempt to organize a purge as a loss with no prospect of evidence. The guilds support this line out of their own interest. The craft cannot tolerate standing idle for prayer spectacles. At an internal meeting, the masters decide that any complaint without substance will be thrown in the trash as slander and punished with a fine, and that disputes over honor will be reclassified as disputes over warehouses, keys, and deliveries. When the market and the treasury become one wall, sermons lose their bite. Without the possibility of humiliating inspection, the crowd quickly tires of listing articles and dates. Meanwhile, the knot of property motives tightens. In another case, an adult widow living by the watering ladder on the embankment is accused of secret meetings after the bell. The investigation insists that her look and gait betray her heresy and asks to read her skin. The clerk asks for the object and the route to be presented, and then a deed of sale for the neighboring house, a moneylender's note about a delay in payment, and a draft contract appear from the warehouses, according to which, in the event of confiscation, the property passes to the person with a long-standing debt. The council orders the neighbors to be questioned. The guards check the locks. The doctor notes a cough and exhaustion after the winter, and the midwives note fatigue and scars as a way of life. As a result, the material matrix shows a simple geography. The case was filed on the eve of the auction for the house, and is fueled not by concern for faith, but by greed. The court transfers the dispute to the property rights chamber and declares that without torture and evidence, there can be no confiscation. The crowd is noisy, but the shops open on time because the treasury does not pay for entertainment. Sometimes pressure on the judge comes not from the square, but from the ladder of authority. In years of turmoil and change, tax collectors lose their records, guards behave rudely, and investigators complain about the laziness of the city clerk. We note this abused background briefly and without detail, as a social fact with consequences. The health of the suspected adults declines, the shops lose turnover, and interest rates rise. And it is precisely these consequences that give the council an argument against jealousy. Market disruption and increasing losses are more dangerous than heretical evenings, which no one has seen and no one has signed up for. In response, the council tightens the rules for bringing cases to court. Without an object and 2 witnesses to the fact, the case will not be registered. Anything related to the body is only private and only as a description of the condition, not as evidence. Any repentant gathering outside of court is at the expense of the organizers, not the treasury. The preacher is angry, but the form does not burn. At the same time, the interrogation technique is becoming less vague. The forms have been rewritten to remove anything that might fuel the crowd. There are no columns for nights, beds, or temptations, no room for hints about women's wiles or men's weaknesses. There are only columns for routes, times, items, correspondence, and debts. The doctor files away his noteworthy part: anemia, dermatitis, cracks, scars, signs of hard labor, as well as a direct reminder that this is not evidence, but a condition. Midwives give sparse statements of craft truth, traces of childbirth, stitches, recovery. When language is returned to the craft of life, erotic contours evaporate. People see that sin often hides coldness, mark hides a tick, insensitivity hides a chest callus, and silence hides fear of the guards. The court distinguishes between shame and evidence, and in this distinction lies salvation from the spectacle. The next turn comes when the Inquisitio presents a set of small signs: paleness, infrequent communion, and uneven gaze, late returns. The city responds with arithmetic. The sum of everyday consequences is not equal to the sum of evidence. To move toward torture, which in these places is only allowed in cases of reasonable suspicion, something serious is needed: a found object, adult witnesses who agree on the facts, a route that coincides with different people, a letter tied to a place and time. It's harsh, but that's how the form erases the charm of searching for the truth through the body. With each closed case, a new line of practice is added to the statute. Physical tests are prohibited. Public examinations are prohibited. Questions that humiliate the dignity of an adult are unacceptable. Confessions without evidence are weak. Property should not be touched until the verdict. In the absence of evidence, the case should be closed without regard for the noise. To show how this works in depth, it is useful to look at a case that would otherwise become a textbook example for fanatics. An adult scribe suspected of copying forbidden books was held hostage by 3 merchants. The search yielded evidence: late candles on the table, a tired look, detachment in the temple. The court demanded the object. The guards brought scraps of parchment, wax seals, and rope for binding scrolls. The doctor described coughing and traces of smoke from lamps. Midwives were not needed here. The scribes sorted through the scraps and found shop accounts and a claim form. No sheets matching the heretical texts were found. Seeing how things were going, the merchants pulled out their guarantees to avoid confiscation, and the treasurer noted that the cost of the inspection was less than the cost of 1 night prayer with a guard. The crowd left without a spectacle, the investigation without a reading of the body, and the court with another terse line: no torture, no case. Against the backdrop of this routine, shifts are taking place in people's minds. Townspeople are getting used to the fact that faith is discussed in sermons and guilt is proven by evidence. Guilds are learning that the risk to their reputation decreases when the council does not pay for purification. Usurers, seeing the predictability of the court, do not raise interest rates. Parish authorities notice that where there are fewer nights of repentance, There are fewer fights and more donations for candles and bread for the poor. Preachers of zeal still find listeners, but their arguments lose their main tool, shame as evidence. The city machine dismantles the accusations, leaving only what can be held on the table without a screaming background. In this picture, the papal network of investigation does not disappear. It works nearby, as a filter for rumors and as a reminder of risk. But that is precisely why the city doubles the strength of its framework. Sheets with formulas as simple as stone appear in archives and on doors. Physical examinations are prohibited. Humiliating procedures are not allowed. Doctors and midwives only for describing the condition. Torture only with strong evidence and the sanction of the council. Property, do not touch on hearsay. Any denunciation with financial gain, double check with deeds and debts. These sheets smell of wax and smoke and sound as boring as a bill. But it is in this boredom that lies the power that keeps homes at the pier and shops at the markets. And the outline of the finale is already visible. One high-profile case will collide with this net. The crowd will again demand a spectacle. The investigation will offer a set of evidence, and the court will weigh the key, the deed, and the empty evidence column, after which a dry case dismissed will be heard, and the confiscation will not take place, because shame did not become evidence and torture did not open the door. In the season when the fair stalls smell of spicy fish and warm wax, a case that has long been buzzing around the square lands on the judge's desk. The investigation brought a scattering of small signs to the town hall, late lights in the windows at the pier, rare visits to church services, the tired faces of adult women working in salt shops, rare letters from monastery schools. The authorized preacher insists on the totality and whispers about reading the body, hoping to return the process to a place where people can be made to tremble before the crowd. The office responds with the usual iron, forms with columns for items, routes, time, and 2 adult witnesses to the fact. A sheet with clear lines. Physical examinations are prohibited. Descriptions of the condition, not evidence. Torture, only in cases of strong suspicion, reduced to things. The guard brings a bunch of keys from the warehouse by the water, drafts of deeds, rent lists, moneylenders' calculations, bags of salt sealed with wax. The town hall doctor adds a noteworthy part: cracks from salt and wind, anemia after winter, dermatitis from dampness. The midwives give a stingy assessment of their craft: scars, postpartum marks, deformities from labor, nothing significant. The clerk underlines with a pencil, description of condition to medicine. The evidence column is empty. While the room breathes heavy air, another thread emerges. Among the papers is a letter from a moneylender with a note about a delay in payment for a house by the watering ladder and a draft purchase agreement for a neighboring plot. If the confiscation had gone through, both properties would have ended up in the same hands, those of a man already weighed down by debt. In a survey of neighbors, dates emerge. The stakes appeared on the plot on the eve of rumors of heresy, and candle stubs were found where wet logs were dried. The city compiles this table like an accountant. At its center is not faith, but profit. The preacher demands purity of soul, but the statute responds with economy. The spectacle costs the treasury firewood, guards, and downtime, while the item costs only one opening of the chest and a double-checking of the deeds. The council chooses what is cheap and solid. The crowd does not give up. After the service, calls for purification are heard in the parish courtyard, and adult women and men are ordered to bear shame in the square. The guards tighten their belts, set up the crossbars, and announce through the scribe, from now on, any public inspections that humiliate the dignity of adults are punishable by a fine. Any prayer nights with guards are at the expense of the organizers. Any lists of repentance without items are to be thrown in the trash. The treasurer brings another sheet of paper. He calculates in writing how much the past nights of jealousy cost and how much a single warehouse inspection with a doctor cost. The difference kills the excitement. Guilds that do not want to lose the season maintain order with a simple decree. A complaint without evidence is slander with a monetary penalty. A dispute over honor is a dispute over keys, inventory, and delivery times. Only matters of faith that can withstand double testimony and evidence are allowed. Against this backdrop, the investigation makes its final technical push. It files a motion for torture, citing a combination of minor signs and resistance by the accused. The judge, leafing through the decrees of Pope Gregory IX, pauses and insists on the literal meaning of the city's framework. Reasonable suspicion is not the sum of shame, but a combination of solid evidence. There is none in the case. No secret seal, no list of meeting members, no letter with a forbidden symbol, no matching routes at the same time. There is only cold, fatigue on the faces, cracks in the skin, late lights, and conversations at the benches. The clerk writes, "Torture is not permitted. Confessions without evidence are not valid." The doctor adds that any physical actions in this case are only harmful to health and of no use in the search for evidence. The midwives sign their part. The condition is described, humiliation is excluded. In this dry chorus, you can hear the air changing. The crowd realizes that there will be no spectacle. The preacher realizes that reading the body will not restore his authority over the hall. The moneylender realizes that there will be no confiscation and that he will have to conduct business honestly. The guilds realize that the season will not be ruined. The council formulates the conclusion without loud words. The case is closed due to lack of evidence. The property is not to be touched. The denunciation is recognized as having a property interest. The organizers of night gatherings are to be warned about fines. All this is written slowly. The sand rustles in the sandbox. The seal presses the wax, and the smoke-smelling paper returns to the cabinet. The myth of constant eroticized cruelty promises a picture where the authorities see through the skin and punish with shame. The document leaves a different picture. Medical prescriptions, midwifery certificates, forms with an empty evidence column, deeds and keys, statutes prohibiting corporal punishment, treasury records where the spectacle is written off as a loss. The papal system of investigation taught cities to listen to rumors, but city order taught investigators to respond with facts. Where torture does not open the door to the subject, it does not open the case. Where shame does not turn into evidence, it ceases to feed the market of fear. The final touch is the habit developed by the courtroom. New forms posted on the town hall doors feature enlarged lines. Physical examinations are prohibited. Questions about nights and beds are unacceptable. Description of condition, only the medical part. Torture, only in cases of objective coincidence. Property, not to be confiscated on hearsay. Denunciations with financial gain, to be verified by purchase and debt lists. Each of these lines is not theory, but the result of shocking spectacles. And when the next sermon about marks on the skin causes a commotion in the square, the court will again respond with a ruler and sand. Show the key, name the time, bring adult witnesses. If not, the case should be dismissed. This is the sober conclusion. The law took away the main resource of erotic accusations, the body as a stage, and returned it to where it belongs, to care and to language that does not humiliate. And the city kept its houses by the water and benches by the market, because it chose things over shame. By the end of the season, the procedures had become habitual, like algae on a stone, and this became stronger than any sermon. In new cases, the clerk immediately opened the page of things and witnesses, and the description of the condition went to the end of the notebook, where the doctor and midwives briefly recorded the traces of labor and illness in adults. The office no longer argued with rhetoric. It simply did not allow it to penetrate the evidence column. The treasurer, tired of nightly jealousies, counted the firewood, guards, and downtime of the shops, and placed the sheet with the expenses next to the empty column of evidence. And this looked most convincing. The crowd learned to be bored when they weren't given bodies as stages. The guilds, seeing stability, kept up their supplies. The moneylenders, seeing predictability, didn't change their rates. The formula, no torture, no business, ceased to be witty. It became routine. This routine was compounded by the final case, which would previously have been a lesson for fanatics. The investigation brought a bundle of minor signs and asked for a reading of the skin, but the court laid out the keys, deeds, and rent lists on the table, found the beneficiary in them, and returned the dispute to property rights. The doctor confirmed that the description of the condition revealed no evidence. The midwives added their crafty dryness. The clerk drew a line in the evidence column, leaving it blank. The request for torture was rejected with words that reflected the city's entire habit. Reasonable suspicion is not a sum of shame, but a solid set of facts. The case was closed without spectacle. The property was left untouched. The organizers of the purges were warned of fines for humiliating adults and for useless community expenses. Thus, the myth of the Inquisition as continuous eroticized cruelty collided with the junction of two machines, the Papal Investigation Network and city statutes, and lost its voice where it found no substance. What remained was inertia. Sheets hung on the doors of the town hall with large letters spelling out, "Physical examinations are prohibited. Questions about nights and beds are unacceptable. Description of condition is a medical matter, not evidence. Torture, only in cases of objective coincidence. Property, not to be confiscated on the basis of hearsay and a collection of everyday circumstances. Denunciations with a financial interest, to be verified by deeds and debts." These formulas smelled of wax and dust, but they were what kept the market from panicking and the houses from selling off. If tomorrow the square is again filled with sermons about marks on the body, the hall will respond as usual. Name the time, specify the place, put the keys and letter on the table, bring 2 adult witnesses to the fact. If not, the case will be closed. The ending of this chronicle is quiet but clear. The law did not abolish jealousy, illness, and poverty, but it took away their access to the body as a currency of judgment. The bodies of adults were returned to the language of care and medicine, faith to preaching and conscience, guilt to a series of things, roots, and signatures. Torture ceased to be a bridge to truth, because truth came to live in objects rather than in tremors in the square. Confiscation lost its former ease, because people learned to look for beneficiaries in deeds rather than in a set of characteristics. The outcome comes from human decisions. The clerk closes the empty evidence column, the doctor leaves a dry note, the midwives sign their professional opinion, the treasurer does not pay for the show, the judge puts his seal on the termination. And that's enough for the city to wake up tomorrow with open shops, a warm stove, and a quiet courtyard where shame is no longer evidence and the keys are at home.